Elizabeth, welcome to Talk Drive. How are you?
Hi, I'm fine, thank you. Nice to talk to you. I enjoy the show as well.
Did we pay you to say that?
No, you didn't.
Listen,
I listen to you all the time, actually.
Oh, bless. This is, peeps, exactly why this country is on its arse. Go, Elizabeth.
My husband came in from work 6th of November last year. He was absolutely fine. He got in for 4:30, gave me a kiss, gave the dogs a kiss, went upstairs to get changed into his comfies, which he always did. Came downstairs, sat on the settee. I said to him, I'm just going to go and check the dinner. And when I came back, he was dead on the settee. I immediately did CPR on him because I obviously knew that was the problem. He'd never had any heart problems at all. All he had was asthma. I phoned an ambulance. I was told by the person on the phone, was he breathing? I went, no. I said, there's no pulse either. I'm doing CPR. Keep doing CPR. It'll save his life. Right, okay. 5 minutes later, I got another phone call. I spoke to him again on the phone. He said, I'm ever so sorry, I'm getting trouble for anyone from our local hospital to pick up the phone. He said, I'm going to have to go via Winchester. He went via Winchester. 40 minutes I did CPR on my husband. In the end, one ambulance turned up. Then I had another 2 ambulances and 6 paramedics, and he was dead.
First of all, don't know what to say. Really sorry. Bless your heart. Horrible time of year.
62.
How old?
62.
How are you?
Not too good.
Kids?
Hate the National Health Service.
Yeah, I get that. And sometimes I think, when calls like this, really appreciate you ringing, because sometimes calls like this, it's easy to go, rah, 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 but I'd love you, if poss, Elizabeth, explain in your words, not me ranting, why you feel the National Health Service, in this instance, and I don't blame, by the way, ambulance men and women, I want to make that point, but what do you think is wrong with it?
The whole thing's gone to pot. I've got a son who's got serious bowel problems since he was born. He actually had to call an ambulance roughly about 4 months ago. The paramedics were absolutely in shock to see that he was in so much pain, asked him what was going on. Lee told him that his gastroenterologist had just told him to take painkillers. They wanted to take Lee into hospital. I'll give them that. They wanted to take him into hospital, but they said, if we take you in, they're going to turn around and send you back out again.
Do you think that we prioritise the wrong people with our National Health Service?
Yeah,
I said that and I got absolutely slaughtered. But I
paid in all my life. My husband paid in all his life. My husband was a former naval medic. He then left and joined the police force, retired as a detective sergeant. He went back to what he loved, which is teaching people how to save lives. And he was a lecturer at Warsash, teaching people from all over the world how to be mini doctors and save lives out at sea. And yet our NHS, they didn't save him.
If an ambulance had come, would it have saved him? Possibly not. But the fact that I had to do CPR on my husband for 40 minutes, it was absolutely terrifying. I don't know how you... I don't know whether you ever recover from something like that. I really appreciate you sharing your call. Horrible time of year for you as well, right?
Yeah, it is. It is.
Well, listen...
But thank you for listening to me anyway.
Listen, Elizabeth, whenever, and we are just... I've said it since I got here. If this station is anything, and we talk about common sense and we talk about free speech, it is stories like yours, and it's not to rant and rage the whole time, but we need to do something in this country because we are failing the people who got this country to where it is. Thank you so much indeed. That was Elizabeth in Portsmouth. Very quickly to Wiltshire. Francis, couple of minutes on Talk Drive. What you got?
Nice to speak again, JK. I have always the need to talk to you and listen. Simple example of NHS inefficiency. I mean, I understand many because I'm writing a patient's app free of charge, age 68, so I'm familiar with very, very many system issues. I won't go on that, but the example I wanted to give is I cut my wrist quite badly 3 years ago. I could see I needed a few stitches. My veterinary father had been alive. He'd have done it for me. So I rang my community nurses and they couldn't help. I rang my GP and they couldn't help. So in hospital a day later, I'm still bleeding. I walked to A&E, waited 8 hours. Eventually I saw a specialist nurse. And so I asked why I had to come to A&E to get the answer that no one in the community is now allowed by the NHS to stitch. So, I mean, it's just incredible.
It's beyond incredible.
They then wonder why A&E gets so overloaded. I mean, this is a systemic problem.
Couldn't agree with you more.
It sends me mad.
And me, mate. Listen, don't think me rude. I've got to move, but I really, really appreciate the call. Francis in Wiltshire. Jesus, what does it say about our NHS? One person who will know the answer to almost anything, because he's the man with the golden tongue. What did that mean? Benedict Spence, a very good afternoon. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. How are you doing, Jeremy?
Has the moustache gone?
It has, although now it's just broad winter stubble. Moustache is gone, and now we're just sort of settling in for the winter time.
Settling in to look like D'Artagnan.
I'll take it.
We'll talk about Assad in a minute. You heard Elizabeth there. I think I think that sort of the ability to tell that story through the sadness and the horror that she felt, saw, and experienced is says so much about her. But people say to me, and I talked about working and doing a show with the ambulance service. I don't blame the men and women. I certainly don't blame the people in the control rooms. But really, Benedict, we are failing. We are failing the British public, and actually, as she said, Elizabeth, the ones that have paid in. Your thoughts on this, my friend?
Well, that's the key bit, actually, and it's a tragedy because people have paid in. What I'm about to say is not me saying they've not paid their whole lives. They have. But the reality is actually they haven't paid in to the system as it currently is. They've not paid in to maintain the capacity. They paid in to maintain the capacity of 20 or 30 years ago. That was what they were paying for. And of course, they were sold the idea that you'd be taken care of later on, because that's how it works. The reality is that the tax take in this country, the resources available in this country, have not kept pace with the requirements for capacity. As the population has aged, younger people are not only not growing as a cohort quickly enough to catch the shortfall. They're not having children, but their wages are also being suppressed. And this is why, you know, when we talk about things like the housing crisis and young people say, well, I can't afford to get on the housing ladder, and older people say, well, just save up like we did. And you go, no, when you dive down into the figures, younger people are earning a lot less, which means that their taxes can't go as far, which means that the health service is going to be one of the things that suffers. That's the reality, is that through series of very poor planning decisions, we've reached a sort of a bottleneck where there's now a great big generation of people who did work their whole lives and expected to be looked after, and what is below them cannot keep pace with that. It can't actually provide. There isn't the wealth creation there. And
let's ask the question that a lot of people don't want me to ask. Would people like Elizabeth's husband have got better treatment if we weren't doling out NHS treatment? All this will upset the bedwetters, to people who come to this country and have paid absolutely nothing into a system that is now struggling to, it seems, well, sue anybody. I'm sorry if that sounds unfair, but I feel really strongly about that. I do. Well, if my mother was still alive, I mean, she had a stroke, she got an ambulance, but if you're going to leave my mother with a stroke for 12 hours who worked for 50 years, that's going to drive me insane.
Yeah, 70% of people who came to this country last year as migrants are net drains on the economy. They don't actually provide anything to the economy relatively. And this is the great lie, I'm afraid, that's been told about immigration, is at the start, when you were bringing in highly skilled people, when you were bringing them in smaller numbers, when you were bringing in Polish builders and that sort of thing, it sort of worked because they were creating value and it was a competitive market. Now, it's just not competitive anymore. People are being brought over and subsidised, and that's one of the things when you, for instance, when you look at the amount of social housing that we have in central London. I know Angela Rayner says we've got plenty of social housing for migrants, but we don't actually have enough social housing. That's the kind of the thing. Subsidised housing in central London and other major cities in the UK, a disproportionate amount of it is going to migrants. It is going to people who physically, can't afford to pay their way. That is actually not a very good use of social housing at all. Actually, if you're giving it to unproductive people who aren't just net drains, it's not being done because we think, oh, maybe they'll be net contributors. It's being done for ideological reasons. It's being done because they think these people should be allowed to live in the most expensive real estate in the world effectively on the taxpayer's dime. It's a mad system. It doesn't work. And it's the same as, you pointed out, the healthcare, people have access to the healthcare. You can come over as, for example, a care worker in your sort of your 40s or 50s from all sorts of countries. And before you know it, you're then drawing on the NHS. You've not paid into the system at all. You're not earning enough for it to be worth your while to be here. But you're here, you've got your visa, you've got your residency, whatever it is, at which point you can just go, thanks very much. And we don't want to sound, this is always the problem, we don't want to sound harsh and say, no, we should absolutely withdraw treatment to people. But what we should be saying is, what on earth is this system that has allowed what is effectively health tourism to take money and resources from people who actually need it? There is, of course, the other thing that we need to talk about, and that is the sheer amount of money that is being given out on things like incapacity benefits, out-of-work benefits, things for things like mental health, the amount of money that is spent on prescription for things that actually people do not need. There is a huge amount of waste, and when you sort of...
But how do you police that, buddy? That's the thing, isn't it? I mean, listen to this. Afternoon, Jess. It has to start, says... I don't know who this is, actually. It has to start with social care. Hospitals are rammed with people who could be discharged if the social care was in place for care or nursing homes. Interesting. Also, the speed at which adaptations can be made. My friend has been ready for discharge since last week, but cannot go home until adaptations are fitted after she fractured her hip. That's a really salient point. Benedict, there's loads I want to talk... We're going to do a sad last for a reason, because I want to rant about these three things. You'll love this. A man who should have been in the military. British intelligence... I love your responses. Watch his face if you're watching on camera. If not, listen to his voice. British intelligence services have been slammed for a racist internship that doesn't let white students apply for roles in the future. And MI5, MA6, and GCHQ, people are being offered the opportunity of a paid 10 to 12-week intelligence internship next summer, which promises the first steps towards an exciting full-time career. But, my friends, the advert explains that the application is only open to students from a black, Asian, mixed heritage or ethnic minority and who are from a socially or economically disadvantaged background. What the hell's happening to our country, Benedict?
I was going to say there is the smallest of small caveats in which I'd be prepared to accept that this might be a good idea. And that is that if you're training spies and you want to drop them into, say, Tehran, or, I don't know, somewhere like that, or North Korea, it's not actually a good idea to have white public school boys such as me fulfill those roles. They do rather stick out. But actually, this isn't about practicality. And, you've just sort of summed it up there at the end. It's about socioeconomic background. It's about ticking boxes. It's about being seen to be inclusive and not about operational capacity or ability. And it just sort of makes you... Actually, it makes me laugh, because it is laughable at this point. It's very serious.
But it's a very serious description about where the hell we're getting to.
It is. It is. And you know what's absolutely mad? It's the description of... It is effectively talking about the exclusion of white people. I'm sorry, there are rather a lot of white people in this country. I don't know if people in London have noticed. If you get outside of Watford, just go beyond, there are rather a lot of white people. They can do things. They can talk. They can do all sorts of fantastic things. They're rather good when they're employed. For some reason, people in London think these people are just not worth anything at all. And it's so frustrating. It's a different country. And do you know what the really ironic thing is? You might actually know this. In the Second World War, if you were able to speak Welsh, now by definition, a lot of people who speak Welsh are white.
Yakida.
If you were able to speak Welsh, you were actually very highly prized for the same reason that if you were in the United States and you were a Native American and you spoke Navajo, you were very highly prized. Why? Because these were not things that actually the average German could speak. In fact, almost no Germans could speak them. So they were very good for sending communications. Welsh people, played a very important role in the Second World War, as did Navajo Indians, because they could communicate freely over the radio. And the average SS officer would listen in and go, I haven't got a clue what on earth they're talking about. That's the sort of thing, that's the kind of diversity that I think maybe we need a bit more of that, a few more Welsh speakers or something.
I have to say, though, it does, and it just sends me over the edge. And number 3, before we go to Assad quickly, households face having to wait weeks longer to have their bins emptied after Labour quietly abandoned plans to secure fortnightly collections. Now, you live on your own and probably a little bit's worth it, but if you've got a young baby and 5 kids, mate, it is an absolute bleeding joke. I do not understand what they do with the council tax or anything. I go to the tip more than I go to the bog nowadays in my house.
I tell you what, well, that's because your diet slimmed down a lot. But I tell you what, it's something where we're getting it here, actually, where I live. I know that it's not so much of a problem for me, but The council here recently decided that they were not going to be collecting bins on a weekly basis. It's going to be fortnightly.
Oh, we've had that for ages, and you're a single man. We have to, I mean, honestly, there's 84 people in my house, and it's every 2 weeks.
Ostensibly, they say it's for climate reasons. It's to encourage people to recycle. And you think, no, it's not. It's because you're lazy.
I nearly said something. And anyway, what's it, the climate? Really? I want my bins emptied. I'm not interested. Drill, baby, drill. Let's just finish as many people have started. I don't want to get too political. Assad has gone, thank God. I think that sends a massive message to the Ayatollahs in Iran. I think it really opens up the opportunity. Of course, there's a vacuum now in Syria, an undoubted vacuum. Which side politically, religiously will fight with the other? I did it slightly differently this afternoon. I don't know if you were listening. We had a Syrian refugee called Mo Saflo, who was born in Syria, nice family, and he got to 17. The war had started, and he was about to be conscripted into an army that he thought was hateful and horrible, and he escaped to this country. But the difference between Mo Saflo and so many of those economic migrants is he came here and he educated himself. He sometimes did 3 to 4 jobs a week. He paid taxes, right? He embraced this country, thanked this country for what we did for him, and is now literally, I mean, he's a British citizen, can't wait to go back. Just have a listen or a watch to this, Benedict. Have a listen.
It's been really hard. It's been really tough on my family, on my friends, of everyone I know, on myself as well, even if I'm here. My dad was in prison for 4 months, at the beginning of the war. I remember my dad, when he went out, I mean, we paid so much money, we begged so many people just to help us to get my dad out. And when he did get out, finally, he was a completely different person. He suffered and experienced so many pain and torture that he told me stories about.
I don't quite know the ending was just, but there we go. One of the reasons that I like this country, people like Mo, we should welcome with open arms. But let's keep it away from migration. What are your thoughts on this?
It's very difficult because actually, as much as we can say that Assad going is a moral good, in that Assad was a dreadful dictator and his regime is hateful, and I suspect over the coming weeks and months we're going to be finding out the true extent, for a start, of the prisons network that exists in Syria. As much as it might be a good that he's gone, in the same way as Colonel Gaddafi was an awful person or Saddam Hussein was, what happens next, as we saw in Iraq and as we saw in Libya, is not necessarily an improvement. HTS, which is the group that has taken Damascus, they are effectively an offshoot of Islamic State. There's no two ways about that. That's who they are. I know that there's going to be efforts to say moderate rebels and, not all of them are like that. No, not all of them are. But the leadership absolutely are. They split from Islamic State over an ideological issue. Those are not people, actually, that the British government will be, striking up diplomatic relationships with anytime soon. We also don't know if the SDF, the Syrian Democratic Forces in the northeast of the country, will accept them running the country. Almost certainly not. They're a Kurdish-backed group. We don't know, therefore, if those two might end up fighting each other. The SDF have tens of thousands of jihadists in their prisons at the moment, and you would imagine, given that they are ideologically the same as the people now in Damascus, they will be wanting those people to be free. This is not a situation, I think, that we are about to see lots of people being repatriated anytime soon, simply because we cannot be sure who's going to be in charge. But the other side of that is, it would be absolutely foolish if, on the back of this, we then opened back up the borders and said, well, there's going to be another refugee wave, we're going to have to take even more people in. And I cite those prison, figures as the main thing here. There are tens of thousands of people in Syria who are regime opponents, who are innocent people who were taken because of the sadism of the Assad regime. It's a terrible tragedy, and it's a terrible tragedy that they've been allowed to suffer for so long. We can thank the Obama administration for that and a few other people. But there are seriously tens of thousands of hardened jihadists still in Syria, people we do not want here. If what happens is HTS ends up taking over the government there, they will not simply sit there and go, well, we're just going to stay in Syria and we're just going to content ourselves with Syria. They will look elsewhere. They will look to Lebanon, they will look to Turkey, and eventually they will get into Europe and they will continue their operations there. We have to be incredibly cautious about what happens now. There is no settled situation now in Syria. There are still lots of competing factions. We don't know what Iran will do. We don't know if Israel will decide to follow through with its threats and strike strategic targets in Syria, because it has said it fears that Iran will use this as an opportunity to move hardware into Syria. It is still an incredibly fluid moment in time. Obviously, we want all of the people who we've taken in to end up back in their homeland at some point because that's what is best for them, to go back to their old lives and to rebuild. That would be the best case scenario. We're not there yet.